For 8 decades, leaders have spoken reverently about a rules-based international order. They invoke it at summits, defend it in speeches, and mourn its erosion in opinion columns. But the truth is simpler and far more uncomfortable. The post-Second World War global social contract is no longer merely under strain. It is broken beyond repair. We should stop pretending otherwise. At its core, the post-war global social contract was an implicit agreement among states that power would be restrained by rules, sovereignty would be respected, disputes would be resolved through multilateral institutions, and economic cooperation would replace zero-sum competition. Anchored in the United Nations system, international law, and Bretton Woods institutions, it promised collective security, predictable rules of trade and finance, and a shared commitment to preventing another descent into global war. Its legitimacy rested not on force alone, but on consent, reciprocity, and adherence to commonly agreed norms. The institutions and norms forged in the aftermath of 1945 were designed for a world that no longer exists. They assumed clear victors and losers, stable alliances, and a concentration of power in the hands of a few states who would act as custodians of global order. That moment has passed. What remains is an architecture that cannot enforce its own rules, cannot adapt to shifting power, and cannot command universal legitimacy. The evidence is everywhere. Russia's war in Ukraine has laid bare the limits of international law when confronted by brute force. Sanctions and diplomacy have struggled to restrain a determined great power, whilst the human and economic costs continue to mount. At the same time, unilateral military action by the United States in Venezuela, resulting in the capture of President Nicolas Maduro and his wife, has triggered global condemnation and deepened concerns that sovereignty and international law are now applied selectively. When powerful states act outside multilateral authorization while invoking the language of legality, the credibility of the entire system collapses. These are not isolated incidents. They are symptoms of a deeper failure. The G20 summit recently held in South Africa, once envisioned as a forum for global economic coordination, increasingly mirrors geopolitical fracture rather than cooperation. Emerging formations such as BRICS are not driven by ideological unity, but by a shared dissatisfaction with Western dominance of global institutions. Multilateralism has given way to bloc politics. Rules have yielded to leverage. This is not a temporary crisis, it is a structural one. At its core, a global social contract rests on shared consent. When large parts of the world no longer believe that rules are fair, evenly applied, or capable of protecting their interests, that contract collapses. What follows is not order, but competition, not law, but power. Compounding this breakdown is a force the old order was never designed to govern: the fourth industrial revolution. Artificial intelligence, digital platforms, automation, advanced manufacturing, and the energy transition are rapidly reshaping power, production, and wealth. Yet the institutions meant to govern global cooperation remain trapped in the logic of the 20th century. Technology is global. Regulation is fragmented. Economic value increasingly lies in data and minerals, while governance structures remain rigid, exclusionary, and outdated. Without a new global compact, the fourth industrial revolution will not narrow inequality. It will entrench it. It will reward those who control technology, capital, and supply chains, while relegating others to zones of extraction and consumption. This is not inevitable. It is the result of governance failure. Nowhere is this failure more consequential or more revealing than in Africa. For too long, Africa has been spoken about rather than listened to. At the Berlin Conference of 1984 to 85, The 1884 to 1885, the continent was not present as an equal participant. It was the menu. Borders were drawn, resources allocated, and futures determined without African consent. That logic has endured, albeit in subtler forms, through aid regimes, debt structures, and extractive trade relationships. But the global context has changed, and Africa's position within it must change too. The minerals that will power the new global economy, lithium, cobalt, manganese, rare earths, and platinum group metals, are overwhelmingly found in Africa. These are not peripheral inputs. They are central to renewable energy systems, electric vehicles, energy storage, and advanced manufacturing. Without them, there is no green transition and no fourth industrial revolution. This reality gives Africa leverage if it chooses to use it. For decades, African minerals have been exported in raw form, generating wealth elsewhere while leaving the continent exposed to volatility and dependence. The agency of the global energy transition has now created a scramble for these resources. This presents Africa with a strategic opportunity to renegotiate its place in the global economy through value addition, regional industrialization, technology transfer, and coordinated bargaining. This is not about confrontation, it is about urgency. Just as oil producing countries once reshaped global energy markets through collective action, African states can coordinate around critical minerals to negotiate fairer terms and secure a meaningful stake in global value chains. In doing so, Africa must insist on being a diner at the table, not a supplier to someone else's feast. All of these points to an unavoidable conclusion. The post-war global social contract cannot be repaired. It must be replaced. A new global contract must acknowledge multipolarity as reality, not threat. It must manage power rather than deny it, and anchor cooperation in mutual interest rather than moral posturing. It must reform global governance to reflect demographic, economic, and technological realities, including Africa's growing population, markets, and strategic assets. And it must address the governance of emerging technologies before inequality becomes irreversibly entrenched. Crucially, whatever new global social contract the world negotiates, it must recognize a simple truth. Without rules that apply to all, no one is safe. A world governed purely by power, selective legality, and expedient intervention does not protect even the strongest states. It merely postpones their vulnerability. Equally unsustainable is the notion that global legitimacy can continue to rest on a system in which a small group of powers retains permanent veto authority over collective action. A world that is economically multipolar, demographically diverse, and technologically decentralized cannot be governed indefinitely by mid-20th century hierarchies. Veto power entrenches paralysis, not stability. Privilege, not legitimacy. It helps explain why states increasingly bypass institutions meant to preserve peace. The choice before us is not between order and disorder, but between a negotiated order and an imposed one. Either the world confronts the reality that the post-war settlement has expired and commits to building a new, inclusive, and enforceable global contract, or we drift further into a jungle where power substitutes for principle and insecurity becomes universal. The first path is difficult. The second is disastrous. The negotiations for a new global social contract must begin now, honestly, inclusively, and with a clear understanding that rules are not a constraint on security, but its foundation. I thank you.